Hello and welcome to episode 119 of Explode Your Expert Biz show, brought to you by gtex.org.uk. I'm your host, Simone Vincenzi, the Expert Strategist, and this is the podcast for experts who want to become the ultimate authority in their niche while making an impact in the world. Yes, today we are talking about how I get more than 100 interviews on podcast every single year. So what strategies I use. And this is a reflection, as you know, this is my solo episode, which is a recording of our live show that I run every Tuesday at 7 p.m. on my business Facebook page, where I share my point of view from a conversation I have during the interviews with my guest. So last episode was 100. This one was actually the reflection on episode 117 that we did with Tom Schwab on how to get on podcast interviews. So I thought about sharing with you what is that I do to get my podcast interviews. In fact, in this episode, I talk about the top 3 ways to get podcast interviews, how to pitch to get on podcast, how to select the perfect podcast for you. You will absolutely love it. And as a resource, let me share with you the tool of the day. As you know, every week, every episode, we give you something, a tool that I use, that I found to make my life easier, better, more productive, more effective. And this one is called the Typorama. It's only one word, Typorama. And it's an image editing tool. I absolutely love it because you can put text, create text overlays, create memes as well. He has hundreds and hundreds of pictures that you can use as a template. It adapts the different formats to the size of the different social media. So you will absolutely love it if you're anytime using images for Instagram, Twitter, for Facebook. You will absolutely love it. I use it every single time. It makes it super easy for me and my team to create all the images that we want. So this is the tool of the day. And remember that if you haven't downloaded another great tool, which is the Ultimate Selling from the Stage Checklist, which is a comprehensive checklist that helps you create sales presentations that converts. So then you can sell one-to-many and stop selling one-to-one. The link is in the show notes. Make sure you get it. And if you want to connect with like-minded people, network like crazy, make sure that you create great relationships, get absolutely free, additional free training to help you grow your expert business, then make sure that you join our Facebook group, Explode Your Expert Biz. You can find it on Facebook and the link is in the show notes. If you haven't subscribed yet, what the heck are you waiting for? Subscribe right now, straight away, so you don't miss any other episode. And if you have any suggestion or anything that you want to share with me, you want to recommend a guest for this show, you want to be a guest on this show, then contact me at simone@gtex.org.uk. That comes straight into my inbox. Without further ado, it's time to start the music, and I'll see you on the other side. Today we are talking about how I get more than 100 podcast interviews every year. It's going to be an awesome show because I'm going to share with you what I do behind the scene. What are the things that help me to get these many interviews, and in particular, how did my audience grow because of these interviews. Now, this is an episode that I'm doing as our solo episode, as you know. And if you have missed the great interview with Tom Schwab from Interview Valley, which was episode 117, make sure that you check it out right now. You will absolutely love it because he shares about how to get on podcast interviews and how to monetize podcast interviews, so you don't want to miss that out. Now, in this is gonna be different because I'm going to share, as you know, every Friday my point of view. This is what I'm doing. I'm going to share my point of view and how I'm using what people share here on our podcast, what our experts share here on our podcast. So, quick thing to start first is if you're not actively targeting, getting out there to get podcast interviews, you are missing out big time. And why is that? You're missing out big time because podcast interviews are a great way, as Tom explained in the past episode, to build such a strong relationship with a new audience that never heard from you before. That is literally, there are not many other things that can match it up. Maybe a Facebook Live on a shared page, but and remember, they are here and they have you in your ears for a good length of 15, 30 minutes to an hour. So the relationship that they build with you is incredibly strong. You're able to show your expertise. You're able to show your character. You're able to show who you really are, and you have enough time to do it. So that's why this is really powerful. Now, there are a few ways that I use to get podcast interviews. Now, the easiest way is because I have a podcast. Remember, I have a podcast, so I have already something in common with a person that I want to get on the show. And the biggest way, the easiest way to grow a podcast is actually by sharing and by being invited on other people's podcast, because you already know that their audience already listens to podcasts. So because that's the biggest and best way, then you will, by sharing by saying, approaching someone else and saying, hey, I have a podcast. Would you like to be guest on my show? Boom. That's an easy one. In particular, if your podcast has already a good traction, you already have in the thousands or tens of thousands listen per month, then you're already in a sweet spot to attract some really good influencers that have big audiences. So we started with no audience, and at the beginning I had to be upfront with my guest. We don't have a big audience. But if you get me in right now, I'm going to keep going, and then I will invite you back. So that's how I built relationship with other people that were podcasting in this way for much longer than I was podcasting. So that's one great way to get podcast interviews. You have your own. You say, hey, would you like to swap interviews? Boom, bish, bash, bosh, you are in. So then we have the second way. And the second way is something that I absolutely love. And you have to pay close attention to this. Pay close attention. Now, you will see that if someone else is interviewed on a podcast, most of the time, they will share on that podcast and they will share that they've been interviewed on such and such show. And they will tag the podcast organizer, the podcast host. So what I do, I go in and connect with that person first, because remember, it's a mutual connection. Now, if I already have a great relationship with the person who is being interviewed, I will ask them for a personal favor, and I will ask, can you please introduce me to the person who runs that show? So that's number one. Can you please introduce me to the person who runs that show? I would love to be a guest too. So that's if you know that person really well. But let's say this person is just a connection on your feed. You don't really know them very well. They don't know you really well. It's a bit more difficult to ask to go for such a request. So what I do, I connect immediately with the podcast host. And I'm sending them a Facebook request. I connect them on LinkedIn. I connect with them on Twitter. And then I start saying, hey, I've seen your show that you did with such and such name. I absolutely loved it. If it's an interesting topic, I will listen to the entire episode. Or if it's not something I'm really interested in, I just want to go on the show, I will listen to a few minutes so you have some context if they ask me the question, what did you like about the show? Right? I subscribe to their podcast. I would say, hey, I just subscribed to your podcast too. So now suddenly I'm showing them that I care about them. Because this is the thing. The biggest thing you can do is actually to show them that you care about them, and it's not just about getting on their show. However, that's the second thing that then you can do. Then once I start building the relationship, I will ask them, hey, how do you select the guest for your show? This is the question that I ask every podcast host or every event organizer. How do you select the guest for your show? And they will say, oh, well, for example, last one I said, oh, I need someone who's running a business, is an interesting person to talk to because I need to talk to them for about 90 minutes. Now, I say, well, I play didgeridoo, I play professional basketball, I run my business, and I do more than 200 events a year. Now, what I'm responding them is that I want to make sure immediately they see that I'm an interesting person and have different things that I can talk about. Because they said, I'm looking for someone who is interesting to talk, who has different topics to talk about. So, in this way, I'm tailoring the response to what they want. If they were saying, oh, I just need a person who had a great business result, I would have just focused on sharing about my business result. If they had asked for a question, oh, I need someone with an inspirational story, I would start saying, well, this is where I was and that's what I've built and that's where I've become. So I will more put an emphasis on my story. So these are the things that are really important for you to always listen to what they are saying and then get back to them. Another thing that I do, so that's number 2. So first of all, as I said, we are going and connect with people. If you have a show, if you have a podcast, ask them for swap interviews. If you don't have a podcast, you can still contact them, and if you get a recommendation, introduction is much easier. Or the other option, you contact someone that has been where a mutual friend has been interviewed. Then the other option is actually looking on what I do all the time. I always go on iTunes or you can go on your podcasting platform and put a keyword and put entrepreneur, for example, if you want to be interviewed in an entrepreneurial podcast, or inspiration if you want to be interviewed on an inspirational podcast, or you will put IT if you want to be interviewed on an IT podcast. And then I will make a list of all the shows that are appearing there immediately, because these are the trending shows. Most of the time they are the shows that are the most famous. And then what I'm doing, I'm contacting the event organizer, and I'm asking them, the host organizer, and I'm saying, how do you select, same thing, how do you select the guest for your show? And they would tell me the criteria. They would say, oh, it's only people I know. They are only come here by invitation only. Okay, so that's an indication for me that it's too early for me to pitch to be on their show. But what I can do, I can get to know them. And I can build a relationship with them so that maybe one day I can be on their show. Or they might say, I'm looking for someone really inspirational. Again, inspirational story. Or they might say, I'm looking for someone who got a great business result. And again, I will say, okay, these are the business result that I got. This is the clients that I've helped. So these are the ways in which you can get really out there massively and get tons of podcast interviews. So you get recommendations, you get it from recommendation, you pitch cold, and you create a list of podcasts that can be interesting to you. Or the other part is you have your own podcast and you do interviews. Now there is another way to get really influential guests on your show, even if you don't have a huge audience. Now, for this, you need to have a bit of an audience, but it doesn't have to be a huge audience. And the way you can do it is to contact them, and in particular, if you know that there is an influencer that they are launching a book, and they're doing a book launch, or they're launching a program. What they're looking for is more leads. What they're looking for is more exposure in that specific period of time. So you can right away and tell them, hey, I've seen you that you're launching this book. I would love to support your book launch. How about we do an interview for my podcast? Now, depending from how big these people are, they will ask you, yeah, that would be great. Thank you for reaching out. How big is your audience? Well, you can say, well, this is my audience size. This is how many downloads I have every single month. And then they're going to judge, is that big enough for them to go in? But even if you have 500 to 1,000 monthly downloads, for example, that becomes most of the time enough for them to go out, because remember, you will be able to share also there on your social media. So I would say, well, my podcast reach, we have few thousand downloads every month, but then we have more than 30,000 social media followers and email followers combined. So I can give you that extra exposure that maybe they're not going to listen to the show, but they're going to be aware about you and the program that you're launching. So most of the time that becomes an easier way to get people that are very influential there on your show. So you're riding the wave of something that they are launching. A book, a program, they're launching their own podcast. But the launch period for every single marketer or entrepreneur is the moment where they need the most eyeballs. Why? Because they're putting so much work that now they need to monetize their work, or they need to raise as much awareness as possible of that work. So that's how I get more than 200 podcast interviews every single year. I've been doing now for 2.5 years, and it works. It absolutely works. Now is your time. You want to get more podcast interviews? Do what I said. You want to get more podcast interviews? Listen to episode 117 with Tom Schwab, because then they are going to be able, in this way, you are going to be able to get the interviews that you want, get the exposure that you want, expand your reach, and build a great relationship with a new audience in a way that it will take you months to build if there was another media. Cool? Brilliant. Thank you very much for watching. For those of you that are live, I really appreciate you. If you are listening to this, or if you're watching the recording, or you are listening on our podcasting platforms, thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate you. And make sure that you listen to the past episode. And if you haven't downloaded our Ultimate Selling from the Stage checklist, do it right now. You will find the link here in the show notes. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any other episode of the show, and follow me on Facebook at Simone Gtex, so then you don't miss any more of this live episode. You can come in, you can ask me your question, and I will be there for you. Hello Vicky, great to see you. Great to see you here. Thank you for joining. Now, I'll see you next time, and always remember that together we grow exponentially.